Okay, let's go ahead and get started. This is the streaming formats session of the day, and our first speaker is Iraj Sodagar, who many people in the audience know. He's the MPEG-/CMAF chair, and he will be talking today on Dash and CMAF, the standards update.
Thank you, Yasser. Thank you, Yasser, Ali, and Alex for this workshop. So far has been really good. As Yasser said, in 20 minutes, I will try to cover the new activities or the latest activities in MPEG Dash and in the CMAF standardization. So, if this slide basically covers everything that has been going on the last 8 years in part 1 of MPEG Dash standards. If you want to implement Dash, implement everything here and you will be fine. It may take many years to implement everything, but Ali talked about the history a bit. Let me say that we started in 2010, the standardization. I remember going in Microsoft with the team and telling the management, we just needed 2 years for standardizing, having standards for HTTP streaming, and we will be done. So it took 2 years of us doing the first edition. We said then when we need to do a few more fixes, and also we can do a promotional working group, industry group, 2 years, and industry will take over the specification, take over the industry, and everything would be interoperable. So Dash Industry Forum has been going on for 6 years, and still we are working on it. And we published the second edition in 2014. We have done 4 amendments. Now we are publishing the third edition. And of course, we still have new things to come in. Amendment 5 and also technologies under consideration. And this is just the core part of the MPEG Dash specification. So I think people probably are familiar with lots of amendments. In this, basically Amendment 1, we defined the extended profile, the profiles that have been used as a core interoperability point for Dash IF implementation guideline, as well as DVB Dash and HTTP and HPTV TV. Amendment 2 has SRD, which is techniques for tiling streaming. That has been very useful in terms of VR streaming. It makes it more effective. There are other extensions like being able to do queries with HTTP gets, the URL parameter insertions. Role values, we added more values to it. Role has been main descriptor in terms of the describing content in the manifest, and the table has been extended in Amendment 2, and you're going to later see also in Amendment 5. Amendment 3 has several different tools. There is a mechanisms to signal authentication and authorization protocols in MPD. We have a method of anchoring live content, and you can say it starts this presentation at this wall clock time using the NTP anchors. There are ways to basically link to external presentation in order, for instance, to create a program guide and then link to external MPDs for each program. There is a tool for signaling continuity between consequent periods. So if a player is playing the content and crosses a period, it does not need to do reinitializations. Again, in terms of query parameters, we extended what we had before to be able to do query parameters not only on the segments, but also on the X-link and also in the MPD. HTTP gets in this one, and Then in Amendment 4, we introduced a new profile. This is mainly when you want to separate the switching point versus the random access point. This profile has been referenced in ATSC 3.0-. As Glenn was saying, MPD chaining is a technique for being able to change two MPDs together. So you play the first MPD and then you jump to the next MPD. And those MPDs could be live versus on demand. This is good for instance, doing pre-roll ads for the live content. MPD fallback is a technique that if for a reason your MPD, the content is not available, or you get 404s in MPD and you cannot play it, you can fall back to another MPD, another manifest, and play the replacement content. Pre-selection is basically signaling mechanisms for mainly object-based audio, MPEG-H and AC4. You are able to basically describe the relationship between different components of the objects and signal it to the dash client. You can include the initialization segments in the MPD itself. So when the client downloads the MPD, it also gets the initialization segments using data URLs. Labels is a very easy tool and useful one that you can basically expose some labels, put the labels and the adaptation sets in the MPD. So say a UI can use those labels to put those information to make it possible for a user to do the selection. For instance, UHD versus HD versus the standard definitions can be labeled and can be signaled using the labels. And also we have a tool for basically signaling how a client can switch between different adaptation sets. For instance, switching between different codecs in dynamic adaptation. So not only doing the switching between representations in one adaptation set, but also going cross adaptation set. Now, this basically second editions plus these 4 amendments plus 2 core addendums all is being published in 3rd edition a week or 10 days ago. That basically the spec is finalized. It's going to go for voting in ISO, a 2 months voting period, and then the publication process. So hopefully it's going to come in sometimes in this year, probably 4 or 5 months from now. But you can say that the 3rd edition is finalized, and that this is the reference basically on, for -IF interoperability guidelines, and hopefully all other implementations like DVB dash, and if HBB TV does a new versions, they're gonna reference this and use the tools exist here. Having said that, each time, as I said, we do this standardization and additions, we think that we are done, but yet we are developing new amendments. And parts of it, I think it's not just because we don't have the vision what needs to be done and completed when. I think mainly it's because the scope of OTT has been growing a lot. When we started in 2010, it was basically, the use cases was very simple. On demand and live, we were talking about ad insertion, very simple ad insertions. But if you look at the deployment today, the number of the use cases, in terms of having multiple CDNs, in terms of encryption modes and common encryption, in terms of being able to signal descriptions of the content in the manifest, and things like being able to do pre-rolls, advanced ad insertions, authentications, all those each time basically motivated us to add more and more tools. So I think that shows it's an evidence of how big the growth of the OTT is basically taking over over not only the TV, but also introducing actually new use cases and new ways of deployment. In terms of Amendment 5, no, I spent only 10 minutes on one slide. In terms of the Amendment 1, in terms of I'm in the favor of less number of slides and more talks, but not 10 minutes per slide. In terms of the Amendment 5, there are lots of tools. I will talk about a few of them just to give you the flavor of what we are working. And also, we always have this document called Technology Under Consideration, things that we think are important. We still have not finalized it. We have not decided whether that's going to become a standard or not. But there is a long list of tools here, and I'm going to talk about one of the tools here. But just to have a complete pictures in terms of MPEG dash, there are several other parts to it. There is a conformance a specification and reference software. It's going, the second edition has been published. Now there is Amendment 1 being worked on, basically putting all the tools of the third edition, supporting all the tools of third editions in this amendment. Ali talked about 3 or 4 other parts. He talked actually about part 3 that I didn't put it here. It's the implementation guidelines, which hopefully the third edition would be updated. First and second editions are quite old. But there is a part 4 for segment encryption and authentication. There was a lot of talks about dynamic behavior of the client in the networks and how you can optimize competitions between the client versus also optimizing the network delivery. This standard specification has actually tools for collaborations between friendly clients, and in fact in -IF and also in 3GPP there is a mode of SANs being put together. It basically allows in say home network, multiple clients basically work with each other and share the bandwidth rather than compete. So if Ali wants to allow his kids to watch the cartoon, his client would not take all the bandwidth for watching the soccer game, and so on. Full duplex dash, we talked about this, Ali talked about HTTP2 and WebSockets. This, in terms of the deployment, we haven't seen much. And it's really worked, at least for HTTP2 case, it works only for very narrow use case in my view, for only live, low latency, and it just reduces the latency of a startup of the streaming. I think we have a better activity right now in terms of HTTP1 and using the chunk transfer mode that has been activity recently in -IF and also DVB dash in terms of low latency. I'm sure we're going to be talk about that. And there is a technical report going on in terms of how you can deliver CMAF with dash. So in terms of the new tools that are coming up in amendment, one is, for instance, for signaling the missing segments. When you have encoders running on, you're ingesting the content in the server, sometimes the encoder output is not perfect. Sometimes you have missing segments or part of the segment is missing, whether it's in the middle of it, at the end of it, or in the beginning, or multiple segments. And in current dash specification, you can signal the gaps with some of the addressing mode. For instance, in the segment timeline, you can address, and if you have missing segments in some representation with having different, basically, segment timeline element for each of the representation, you can signal the gap for the representation that have missing segments or missing part of the segment. The problem is that that's not as efficient as if you basically do segment line in adaptation sets. So we have a new basically element that allows telling what representation, what segments are missing. So you can signal that in the MPD. In addition to that, also you can have a major brand for the segments that have no data, that they are missing segments. So when it's passed to the decoder knows that it's not a complete, or the player can even ignore them or treat them. Interesting enough, recently we did a survey on live streaming for both service provider and client, and one of the questions was how you deal with the missing segments, and the answer was all over the place. There are implementations, they don't do anything and leave it to the client to figure it out. There are implementations that they fill the missing segments with the logo or blank videos. There are implementations that they insert the period, finish the period and insert a new period. So this maybe helps basically having one single solution for all those cases rather than treating the missing segment differently. Another tool we are adding is that there have been requests for being able to signal the actual capture time of the first frame of the video. If you do it based on if you include the UTC time, then the application can tie it with the other streams. So we are using PRFT box, production reference time box, that includes basically the UTC time of the first frame. Also, we are signaling the existence of it, the use of that box in MPD, and if you, in fact, the stream inserts new PRFT boxes down the streams, you can signal the existence of it, so the player can use that information for syncing the streams with other streams or application data. The Dash specification has an attribute called @profiles that was supposed to use for signaling basically the interoperability point of profiles of Dash, not only on the manifest level, but also the combinations with the codec and so on. But we have been adding so many features in Dash that now each time that you do a combinations, you need to basically introduce a new URI, and this becoming difficult. So there have been discussion whether there is a better mechanisms to have a descriptive expression that says that this MPD, especially in the case of the live, that you don't have the entire MPD, the MPD gets updated. These are the requirements. This is the encryption mode, this is the DRM, this is the additional features of Dash, for instance, thumbnail navigation or trick mode. This MPD contains, what codec it contains, what combinations can be used, and so on. And there are two techniques right now in amendment. One is descriptive language, simple descriptive language, and there is another technique using what we call early available period, which basically are empty periods. They just that doesn't have any resources, but it tells basically what codec and what DRM is using, and we are considering, still we are investigating which one we're going to use in amendment. Oops. I should went too far. So the last thing I want to talk about in Dash is the event. Event has been a very strong tool in terms of not only for doing the MPD updates, but also being able to carry information that ties to the media timeline for the applications, for the interactivity, for any type of, say, scores or information that needs to be displayed along with the media. But we just had the definitions of the event box in terms of in-band events. No detailed descriptions of the timing of it, no detailed descriptions of the client API. It has been activity in 3GPP as well as Dash-IF, and now it's part of the MPEG Dash amendment, is that how the timing event model works. This is important because not only it tells when for the application when those events will be available, but when you are using the event as a service provider, it tells you when to insert events so the applications be aware of it. And right now there are two timing models or two choices about basically dispatching events to the application, one at the start of time of the event and one ahead of the start of event, because events can be inserted in the segments prior to the actual segments that contain the start of the event. Again, there is a lot of discussion going on this, and of course we have MPEG event that also needs to be tied in this same model, hopefully in a single API for the application. So that was Dash activities. Now on CMAF, the good thing about CMAF is that we have only 2 editions. The first edition is done a couple of years ago, but the actual publication is this year. In terms of the new amendments, there is the first amendment supporting SHVC, or a profile for SHVC, and also a media file for MPEG. Amendment 2 includes a profile for XHEAAC, which is basically USAC codec, can encode audio and music from 16 kilobit to 12 kilobit to 64 kilobit per second, so it's very efficient. There are 2 new media profiles based on IMSC 1.1. We had media profiles for IMSC 1, but now that IMSC 1 has a new version or new editions, then we also added those. And there is a way to basically signal the existence of 608, 708 SCI messages using a new brand. So there are, again, TUC and explorations going on in CMAF. The main work on the TUC is that when you sequence CMAF presentation, what are the splicing conditions that you can play the content together. This came out of some of the activities in WAVE, and now being also formalized here. There is the issue of the multi-stream, because like now MSC supports single stream, and in case of the CMAF is designed for CMAF single streams. In the case of multiple streams, how we can support CMAF, there is an exploration going on there. I know the time is done, so these are basically the media profiles, the new media profiles in amendment. I talked about USACs and also IMSC1, as well as the branding for CMAF. Let me finish by this saying that the Dash and CMAF specification has been used several places. Of course, Dash IF has worked very closely with MPEG in terms of developing not only the Dash, but also the core specification and helping developing the core specification and CMAF, but also writing the actual implementation guideline, creating the test vectors, creating the tools for doing this, but also the collaborations between, say, DVB Dash, MPEG and Dash Industry Forum has been very fruitful. Now low latency, there are going to be presentation that it's a main activity here. Low latency Dash, ATSC 3.0, again, as Glenn said, that it uses Dash for delivery. That broadcast TV profile that was developed in Dash is being used here. And of course, that was also a joint activity with Dash IF and ATSC. WAVE is using CMAF, defining basically content specs and also the device playback, as well as application environment, to basically creating a set of tools to be able to have interoperability at the device level for the smart TVs and any devices that use streaming as a way to get the content. The important thing is that we have a lot of features in Dash. We have a lot of activities going, and I think the key, and so far I think we've been relatively successful, is coordination with these all activities, trying to come up with the minimum set of features to implement and get the most important use cases to support. As I said, when we did the recent survey on live streaming, both on the client side as well as on the services, it seems that, for instance, client implementations, one major complaint from live service providers are that the client implementations are not mature, and each of them have support different features. So there is not a set of common features that everybody supports, and then you have full interoperability. So they have to do different things, publish different MPDs for different clients, and that's a major pain point. Or in terms of the client, they try to support lots of things, but the number of features is a lot, and also understanding what exactly they need to implement, how to treat those features, how to behave. We need more understanding, more communication. So I think, again, still industrial collaboration is the key to why Dash has been, in my view, very successful. Still, it's a key to basically take it to the end and make it basically ubiquitous everywhere. Thank you very much. I'm already over my time.
Thank you, Iraj. We'll go ahead and take one or two questions. If I could have the second speaker set up and get ready while we're doing that. I think I can see everyone. Anyone has their hand raised for a question?
Hi, Raj. Of course, this is a talk about Dash and CMAF, but any comments about how CMAF also works with HLS and how HLS is using CMAF?
Oh, yeah, I forgot that. Of course, I think when we started Dash, we said we have, as Ali had in his slide, 6-7 streaming format we wanted to converge to one. We basically became two, Dash and HLS, and CMAF was a next step to at least make a common media encoding format for both HLS and Dash. So in my view, that has been also a huge step. But still, we have two different manifest formats, which I don't think it's really a big deal. Translation from one manifest to another is not that difficult. What's important is that whether you have enough features to do the application. In my view, I think we can hear from next speaker, HLS also has been adding features. Some of those features we think, in fact, are from Dash, but makes HLS more rich. So whether we're going to have one single manifest format or not, yet to be known, but I don't think is as big deal as, for instance, having same common encryption mode. So.
Yeah, so quick question on, you had talked a little bit about missing segments and some work that was done there. Is there any guidance in any of the Dash specifications that also talk about stream resiliency? So you may have a primary and a secondary, and if you're missing a segment in the primary, you might be able to retrieve it from a secondary stream. Is that contemplated in any of the documents or recommendations on how to deal with redundant streams?
Well, so when you're talking about resiliency at the server, whether the server switches the resources or in the MPD publishing multiple resources, because in terms of the delivery, for instance, we have multiple base URLs. You can deliver the content through multiple CDN. So in terms of delivery, if something missing one path, one CDN, you can switch to other, either a sub-CDN or a CDN. In terms of the resiliency in the server, switching between different resources, there is nothing in terms of, in terms of how to treat multiple different ingest streams. It could, I assume you could publish, for instance, to an MPD update, either removing or adding new representations when you do that. But in terms of the missing segments, right now, there hasn't been anything, just this is very new one in terms of when there is a missing segment, you just mark it in the MPD, or the output of the encoder can add the brands, the missing brands in those segments. So the content shows that property of not all the content is available in that segment.
All right, I guess that was the last question because we have to keep moving, but thank you, Iraj, again.
Thank you.